Hopefully you all got a chance to make at least a couple revisions to your original pinch pot, or maybe you even had to start over. So I'm just grabbing the pieces directly out of the plastic bag that I had put them in on Friday. And I just want to take a peek and see kind of what state they're in, basically, in terms of what stage of clay. And so what I can feel is that they're still pretty plastic. They're getting to that point of being leather hard. But one thing that I can tell from comparing the two different pinch pots that I have, I want to think about what kinds of concepts I'm being assessed on. So even though I just want to see that you try, obviously there are criteria that I'm looking for when I look at the overall just build of your pinch pot. So the images that were on your slide, your little rubric slide on Friday, were the 4 things, which were that your form should be symmetrical, meaning if you were to cut it in half, it's going to be the same on both sides. Your rim should be symmetrical, so it's not like this oblong weird loop. It doesn't have weird wonky sides on the lip or anything like that. And then that your walls should be an even thickness. So I said a 1/4 inch thick. If you think about it, it could be about the thickness of a pencil. And then you really want to think about the height of your walls as well. Like if you're looking at it, does it look like things are a little bit uneven? So when I'm looking at this first one here, I can see that I could actually probably go in and start thinning it out a little bit. And so I'm just going to continue to work my way and noticing if I have any cracks or anything like this. I might need to add in a little bit of moisture. Since it's been sitting for a few days and hasn't been touched or tampered, you can see that I might end up getting a few little cracks. And so I've got my container of water here, and I can just start to add in a little bit more moisture if I needed to. And again, this is all just going to be dependent on where you need to go if you have to make these changes. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if your stage of clay, if you're noticing that it's cracking too much when you're starting to make those changes, maybe you just kind of say, okay, you know what, if I keep going with this, it's really going to tamper with the construction. And so maybe I just kind of count my losses for that little section, and then I move on to my next piece. And so all I'm trying to do again is to just thin it out a little bit, because I can see that it feels heavy, doesn't quite give that 1/4 inch or pencil thickness weight that I'm looking for. One thing that I noticed in some of your guys' video, or sorry, some of your pictures that you were submitting, was that you had some edges that would maybe look something like this, where they were really inconsistent and a little wobbly. And even though I didn't use tools in those first videos that I made, I want you to think about what tools you were given, and then also what tools you have found where you could maybe take, say, just like a plastic knife if you have one, anything where you could just kind of trim and make an adjustment to that edge to carefully cut off, and maybe try to just kind of fix up, touch up a little bit that rim, that lip of your pot, to get it to something where it's a little bit more consistent. The other thing that I forgot to mention in that first video was you might have noticed how dirty your sponges were. Many of your sponges were not brand new, and so you might just find that they look dark or discolored or anything. It's probably just paint that we use to wash up stuff. So you could run them under the sink, run them under warm water, and that should help kind of fix it up. So what I'm trying to do again today is just get this to the point where it's at a better, more workable state, and it's starting to get to this thickness level that I want. And then more importantly, you are going to start adding in a foot. And the article that was included in your content last week would have shown you how you needed to create a foot by just doing what's called a coil, right? And it looks kind of like a little snake, and many of you have probably rolled out a coil if you did anything to do with ceramics in elementary or especially in studio art. And so I want you to think about what kind of foot you want to add on. And I'm going to show you a couple different options. I will show you utilizing that coil method for a foot, but then I'm also going to get you to think about how you can add in little pieces, or you could start with the coil and how you could take away certain pieces, right? So let's say at this point that you have your pot to about the general thickness that you want. Again, you're looking to see if your walls are that even height, and you're trying to gauge if your circumference and everything looks pretty symmetrical. And so if you're feeling pretty happy about it, I'm definitely okay with mine. Again, depending on the state and where it was, you might have just some little imperfections, and that's totally fine. It's been sitting for a few days. So I'm just trying to kind of smooth these pieces up. And then what I'm gonna do is end up storing my pieces just upside down for now. And I do have this mat. I can put it on either the mat, I could have it sit on a paper towel. Any of those options are fine. So I have my original clay still inside that bucket, and it's inside that bag so that it doesn't dry out. And I'm gonna try to take off a little even piece using that floss again, my designated floss for my take-home ceramics kit. And I'm gonna try and get it as tight as possible. And what I wanna do is try to get a nice even slice all the way through. And I probably won't end up using all of this clay, but at least it'll give me a better starting point. So you can see that I just kept that momentum going through so that it's pretty smooth. And then what I'm gonna do is I am gonna start out by trying to get just a good little even cut. That way I've got more of a coil started, and even though it's a little bit of a square, I can end up rounding it. And so I'm just kind of showing you these different options because, you know, everybody, we're at a little bit different state in the sense that you have your clay in a different situation. Since it's rounded, I'm pressing to try to get these edges, or I should say since it's more geometric and really flat, I'm trying to get this to be a little bit more rounded. And then eventually, I'm going to utilize a little bit of pressure and slowly just try to roll out and make it as even as possible, a nice coil. And I'm not going too quick, and I'm trying to get it so that when I can feel that one end is thicker than the other, that's where I'm putting more pressure onto it. And so this is probably about pretty good for where I want it to be. And looks like it's in a nice plastic state. I'm okay with that, so I am gonna close up my bag of clay so that I can keep that from drying out. And then one thing that's really important is that you make sure when you are doing all of your attachments that you score and slip or scratch and attach. Now what I mean by that is you need to physically make marks into the clay. And so if you're just going in and like lightly pressing in with something that's gonna scratch into the surface, it's not gonna work real well. Your pieces aren't gonna stay. You have to really make sure to dig in and crisscross those pieces. So scratch and attach, score and slip. Now slip, if you remember, it's just that liquid clay, and we don't have any. You can make some, right? You could add in a little bit of clay and a little bit of water. But what we're gonna do here is just use water. Our clay is soft enough that we actually don't need to do a whole ton of slip. We can just utilize water. And one method that I try to do as much as possible is actually placing my piece on here first, measuring off where I'm just gonna slice and just kind of pinch off that excess space. And then you could use a toothpick, you could use a stick, whatever you have, to kind of just draw in and trace where you think you're gonna have those attachments be. And so I know that it's gonna be all along the edge, and I'm just gonna take a look and see how I feel about that before I make those marks. I think that's pretty good. And then one thing I like about a lot of these plastic silverware pieces is that they have a serrated edge to them. And so I can really go in and scratch really, really well to dig in. And you're not like trying to completely ruin the surface of it, but you do want to dig in. And then I am going to crisscross and go over those as well. So it's just getting part of the clay to get raised up. It's giving your attachment piece, a surface to get stuck onto. That looks good there. I'm gonna do the same thing. And then again, like I said, because my clay is soft enough, I don't need to have slip necessarily. So I just have my sponge here with a little bit of water, and I could go in and I could even scratch in a little bit more just to really make sure that it gets nice and secure. And then I'll press down and make sure that I give enough pressure to really get it to stick. And then if you want, you can even take some of that excess clay and let it start soaking up into the water. But then I find that the paintbrush that you received in your kit is gonna be super helpful for just kind of filling in some of those gaps. And again, we're at a little bit of a disadvantage and just having to do some problem solving because we're not in the studio. We don't have access to some of the normal materials that maybe you would. But a paintbrush and water, you can already see it's starting to create that slip naturally. So then I can just go in and start utilizing that to actually clean up all of those little dry spots, cracking spots, anywhere where there's a bend. Now, if you haven't noticed here, my production value has gone up in terms of my videos. My husband is helping me record today. Super nice of him. So we'll just keep smoothing this out. So I mentioned a little bit ago too that you don't have to do this coil foot. You could choose to do something else. When you do store your piece, you want to make sure that you have this foot raised. And we'll just leave it something like this. You will owe a picture today. You'll want to have some sort of progress that you show me from a difference of where you had your day 1 pot to where you're leaving off today on this day 2 piece. So we'll just kind of let this sit here for a minute. The last thing I'm going to show you here is that you could do separate feet. And I think that if you're going to do this, you want to stick with 3. And so I'm going to make 3 little evenly constructed tiny little slabs, if you will. And I'll leave them kind of geometric, so I won't round them out. Maybe I will actually. The pot's round, so I kind of want it to be rounded a little bit. And I'm not going to actually attach them, but I just want you to start thinking about how you can manipulate the clay and how you could change up to give yourself like a different look of a foot. So you could get more creative in the sense that you could have, you know, 3 little pieces that would stabilize and really play well with the pot to just give yourself some negative space. They won't balance quite yet, but at least you can kind of get the general idea. Another idea, if you're trying to get creative and not just do a simple coil ring around your pot, is that you could have that coil ring and you could attach it, but then you could actually go back in and take little sections out. So let's say that this was perfectly put together. Maybe you take a little sharper utensil and you could like remove little sections of it to just give yourself again a different look for that foot. So I want you smoothing out your pot today, figuring out what 4 criteria, that is your attendance question for the day, is answering what 4 things I'm looking for. And again, it's on that slideshow from last week. It's on that rubric. So that's an easy way to find it. But I'm looking to see what 4 things. So you could just say symmetrical form, symmetrical rim, 1/4 inch walls, even height. That's your attendance question for the day. And then make sure that you get that second photo, your day 2 progress photo, uploaded. And however I'm going to see your foot, could be, you know, whatever type of attachment, I just want to see that you got something.